We just finished a series on the Beatitudes, which is the first part of what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded in Matthew 5 through 7. We're going to continue with the rest of the Sermon on the Mount with a new series that I've titled, Did Jesus Really Say That? Now, in this section of Scripture, this is where in the first chapter at least, most of the things he says, he starts out by saying, we talk about it quite a bit, he says, you have heard it said that. He says, but I say to you. Okay? And he gave a different perspective than what was the common perspective of the day and even what's the common perspective of today. So we're going to be learning, what did Jesus actually say? How should we actually live? And of course, the Beatitudes is part of that. He said, if you're true believers, if you're really following me, your attitude needs to change. And so he gave us the Beatitudes. He says, these are the attitudes that you need to have in your heart. But then he moved from there and said, once you have the right attitude, if it's on the inside, it should move to the outside. So he starts talking about our actions. Now, since the Sermon on the Mount comes early in the book of Matthew, we often think it was the first teaching that Jesus gave. But we need to keep in mind the way our Bible is laid out, and even the stories that we find are not necessarily chronological as to when they really happened. Does anybody know what the first thing in the Bible was? I mean, other than creation and all that, but we see creation and then we have the stories of Abraham and all that kind of stuff. Job actually happened way before Abraham. But we think he happened afterwards because we find the book of Job in there in the middle of the Bible. So we think that's where it happened. The Bible is not necessarily chronological, okay? And even the Gospels are not necessarily chronological. They do all start with the birth, okay? That happened first. You couldn't get to the rest of it without the birth. But the rest of the stories are not necessarily in the order of the way they happened. The writers of the Gospels were not necessarily trying to write a biography on Jesus' life from birth to resurrection. They were simply trying to pass on the things that they had learned from Jesus so that others could benefit from those teachings. It doesn't change the truth of what's been written, but it sometimes helps us just to understand things a little bit better when we don't force things to fit together in a particular order. Since none of us were really there when things happened, we can't know for sure the exact order, but by piecing together and looking at the different Gospels and saying, okay, this kind of goes along with that, and by looking at some of the historical documents of that era and stuff, we can get a pretty good idea of where it happens. Most historians believe that what we find in Matthew chapter 5 through 7 probably happened 6 to 12 months into Jesus' 3-year ministry. Okay, so it's not the first thing, it's fairly early, but by this time he had already gotten quite a following. People were intrigued by what they saw and by what they heard, and he's got a lot of people that are following him everywhere from town to town. They just quit their jobs and packed everything else and said, we're going to follow this guy because we're intrigued. We want to know what he's saying. So he's got a big group of people already following at this time, 6 to 12 months into his ministry. The Sermon on the Mount is probably the best known part of Jesus' teaching. Most people who have been in church can at least talk about the Sermon on the Mount. They know the Beatitudes are there, and they know that it's a big sermon that Jesus preached. So it's one of the most popular. However, it's probably also one of the most misunderstood portions of Bible. We don't always know exactly how to interpret what he said there. Even people that aren't Christians quote parts of the Sermon on the Mount. We have things that are part of our vocabulary, like do unto others, judge not. How many people have heard that one? Everybody likes to quote that one. You're not supposed to judge me. Didn't Jesus say judge not? So even people that aren't Christians have some of the vocabulary from the Sermon on the Mount. They may not even know it's part of the Sermon on the Mount, but they at least hear those words. Turn the other cheek. A lot of those things people can quote, but sometimes they have them out of context. They don't know what they really mean. What was Jesus really trying to say? As I already mentioned, people were intrigued by Jesus. They wanted to know why he was different. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spent a lot of time explaining the differences between God's kingdom and man's kingdom. He made it clear that as citizens of God's kingdom, we should live differently than the world. We as believers, if we don't live differently, then it's a good indication we may not truly be citizens of God's kingdom, because God's kingdom is different. If we're looking at the world for our cues, we're looking to the wrong place. Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. In my kingdom, we don't do things the way everyone else does them. So who are we looking to for our clues? Jesus started in the Sermon on the Mount with the Beatitudes, which explain our attitude, and then he says, now that your attitude is right, let it show in your behavior. If our attitude is truly the attitude of Christ, then our behaviors or actions should reflect the behaviors of Christ. Because everything we do flows from the heart. Luke chapter 6, verse 45 says, "A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. An evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks," and we could add to that, which is not really taking it out of context, it's actually implied in there. We could say, the mouth speaks and the hands do what the heart is full of. Our actions, our words show where our heart is. And if our attitude is right, if our hearts have been changed, then our actions, our behaviors should also change. What we find in Matthew chapters 5 through 7 is not necessarily in the order that Jesus actually said them. And there may have been other things that were actually part of that Sermon on the Mount which are not there. Some of them may be in other parts of Matthew or some of the other Gospels, but Matthew is, from the best of his recollection, saying these are the things that Jesus said that I think you need to know about. Today we're going to look at verses 13 through 16 of chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16 says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." The Beatitudes describe the inner character of a believer. The metaphors of salt and light describe our outward influence. People took notice of Jesus because he was different. When people came in contact with him, they felt different. And when they listened to him, they began to think differently. They began to think like he thought. Jesus is teaching us in this passage that we should make a difference in the world. As Christians, we shouldn't just blend in. We should be world changers. We should make a difference. The world should be a better place because we're here. Notice that Jesus didn't say, "You are like salt," or "You're similar to salt." He said, "You are the salt." Everybody look at the person next to you and say, "You're salty." When we become believers, we're changed. We're transformed. We become something different. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here." When you become a believer, you turn into salt. And you turn into light. You change. And salt and light affect everything they come in contact with. The metaphors of salt and light have a little bit of meaning to us in our modern society. But to the audience that Jesus is speaking to, it had much more meaning. Salt and light were very important to early civilizations. I mean, they're important to us. I mean, I know when something has not been salted. And it's amazing to me that salt changes the flavor, and it doesn't always make it salty. Sometimes it can make it sweet. Have you noticed that? I remember growing up, and my favorite thing to have for breakfast was cream of wheat cereal. How many of you guys like cream of wheat cereal? I love cream of wheat cereal. And my mom would give me the cereal, and we'd take brown sugar. We put brown sugar in there, and we stir it all up and add some milk. It was delicious. And one morning, she gave me the cereal. I put the right amount of sugar in there, and I tasted it, and it still wasn't sweet. So I added more brown sugar, and I tasted it. It still wasn't sweet. I added more brown sugar, and I said, "Mom, there's something wrong with this cereal. I keep adding sugar, and it's not getting sweet." She says, "I forgot to put the salt in it." So we added a little bit of salt, and all of a sudden, because of all that sugar I put into it, it's way too sweet. Some of you say, how could something be too sweet? But salt changes things. It can make it salty, it can make it sweet, but it changes things. And without the salt, there are other things that don't do what they're supposed to do. You put salt in a cake. The cake doesn't taste salty. It tastes sweet, but one of the ingredients is salt. You have to have the salt to make it turn out all right. So we think of salt primarily as a seasoning. But the people listening to Jesus understood the difference that salt could make in the flavor of their food. But to them, it wasn't just seasoning. It wasn't just to make things taste better. Salt was equated to life itself. They knew that without salt, they could not live. They had to have salt for their health. In the hot and arid climate of the Middle East, salt was necessary for proper body metabolism. When the body loses moisture and salt through perspiration, the salt has to be replaced or death will occur. Even today, people who work in very hot climates sometimes carry salt tablets. So when they start feeling weak, they can take that salt tablet and replace that salt in their bodies, and all of a sudden, they have strength again. They didn't have Gatorade. They didn't have vitamin water. An athlete out there, running around the track would take a salt tablet to get his metabolism going again. They said, we have to have salt. Without salt, we will die. It's not just for flavor. It's for life. Early civilizations didn't have refrigerators and freezers to keep food fresh. So how'd they keep it fresh? They packed it in salt. Lots and lots of salt. They would just bury their fish in a bowl of salt and just keep it in there. And that salt would preserve that fish so that they could eat it several days later, even though they didn't have refrigeration. Probably tasted salty when they ate it, but at least it was still fresh. They didn't have to eat rotten fish. They used salt for healing. Before the days of modern medicine and a pharmacy on every corner, salt was used to sterilize wounds and speed up healing. Salt water was poured into open wounds to ward off infection. If you had a sore throat, you didn't take a throat lozenge. You gargled salt water. Anybody ever try that? It works. It does a great job. It does a better job. In fact, it might sting a little bit, but not only does it, I don't know, I think it just covers up that sore throat or something. Not only does it make it feel better, but your throat will actually heal up quicker if you put salt water, because salt will also kill those things. When I get one of those canker sores on the inside of my lip, you know what I do? I get salt, and I stick salt on it. I dip my finger in water, I dip it in the salt, and I stick it on there. Ooh, it stings. But those canker sores go away very, very quickly. Back then, they didn't have other things to use. They used salt for medicine. You pour the salt on a wound. Can you imagine that? A cut, you don't spray antiseptic on it. You don't go to your first aid kit and get some antiseptic spray and spray it on there. You get some salt, you dissolve it in water, and you pour the salt water over that wound. And some people go, but you know what? Their wounds healed up a lot quicker than ours because salt is a natural antiseptic. It may sting, but it's going to bring healing. So they used salt in their first aid kits. Salt wasn't a luxury to the Roman civilizations. It was a necessity. Salt was considered to be the most valuable commodity on the earth. To many, it was considered even more valuable than gold or silver. It was so valuable that many people, including the Roman soldiers, would actually be paid wages in salt. That's where we get the word salary from. It's also where we get the phrase, not worth their salt. So some of our language that we use goes back to the days when salt was something of value. It was a commodity that was traded, and you could actually purchase things with salt because people needed salt. So you give them salt. Salt changes things that it comes in contact with. When Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth," the audience heard, "You are valuable," because salt was valuable. We are valuable to God. He values us so much that he gave everything he had in exchange for us. But we also have value to the earth. The reason we're left here once we accept Christ and not taken immediately to heaven is because we're needed here on earth. We need to be salt. We need to be the preservative. We need to be the healing agent. We need to be the seasoning. We are left here to make a difference in the world. If you think the world is rotten right now, just think what it would be like if all the Christians were taken off the face of the earth. We are necessary to preserve the earth. When we put salt on food, it changes the flavor. When he puts salt on a wound, it sterilizes and helps heal. When he puts salt on meat, it preserves it and keeps it from going bad. Salt has an influence on other things. As Christians, we're supposed to have an influence in the world. But salt can only have an influence if it has contact with something. When salt is sitting on the shelf in a store, it isn't doing anyone any good. When it's in a salt shaker, it isn't doing anybody any good. Salt has to come out of the container and mix with something else in order to have any effect. We like to complain about the condition of the world and how evil it's becoming. But that's what happens when salt isn't doing its job. The world, when left to itself, will deteriorate. It will rot. It will become corrupt. When the salt of the earth all congregates in churches and hides away from the rest of the world decays. It's like putting salt in the bottle and putting it on our shelf or on our cupboard and then complaining because our food doesn't taste right. It won't taste right unless the salt is put into the food. The world will not change. The world will not become better unless we, as the salt of the earth, get out and mix with the world. Jesus didn't say, "You are the salt of the church." He said, "You are the salt of the earth." Think about that. He didn't say, "You're the salt of the church." He said, "You're the salt of the earth." We spend too much time in our stained glass cathedrals assaulting each other when we should be out salting the earth. A little bit of salt in the right place at the right time will improve flavor and bring healing. But too much salt congregated in the same place will bring death. Salt Lake and the Dead Sea have no life. How many have visited one of those places? Probably more likely Salt Lake than the Dead Sea. There is no life in those bodies of water because salt comes in and it stays. There is no outlet. It doesn't go out anywhere else. It comes in and it keeps becoming saltier and saltier and saltier. And it's become so salty that nothing can live. That's what happens when you put a bunch of salt in one place. Things die. And I have to wonder if maybe the reason some of our churches die is because they become too salty. All the salt comes and congregates and just says, "Oh, we just love being salt. Let's just give ourselves a big salty group hug." And the salt is never going out and being put into use. And the church just gets saltier and saltier and saltier, and pretty soon it just starts to die because there's nothing else coming in to it. Salt by itself doesn't produce life. Salt produces life when it comes in contact with something else. When it comes in contact with something that needs salt to live. Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life." He puts his life in us, and then he expects us to become life for others. Jesus didn't say, "Come and sit." He said, "Go, make, go and produce, go and be salt." Notice the last part of Jesus' statement in Matthew 13. He says if salt loses its saltiness, it's no longer good for anything. When we're acting like salt, we're the most valuable thing on earth. But if we're not acting like salt, if we're not being salt, he says we're worth nothing. What good is salt if it's not being used? How many of you put salt on your shelf and just sit there and say, "Oh, look at the salt. Isn't it so beautiful? I am just so glad I have that salt. It just beautifies my house." Now, people have salt and pepper collections. They buy the containers to put the salt in and maybe collect those, and they might have a little bit of salt in it. But the salt itself, we don't buy it to look at. We buy it to use. It's only valuable when it's used. When we act like salt, we're the most valuable thing on earth. But Jesus says when we're not doing our job, when we stop being salt, we're worth nothing. Might as well just throw it out and trample it, which is what they did with old salt. They made roads out of it. They threw it out on the roads. How many of you want to be trampled on, want to be walked on? Or how many would rather be bringing healing and bringing life? Salt makes a difference. Salt changes things. What kind of difference are you making in the world? After calling us the salt of the earth, Jesus gives another metaphor. He says in Matthew 5:14-16, not only are you salt, but he says you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Notice again the word are. He said, you are the light. Talking to believers, you are the light of the world. Airplanes and ships rely on lights to navigate safely. Without a light to guide them, many lives would perish. Automobiles rely on lights. We have headlights to show us a clear path in the darkness. We have fog lights to help us through a foggy night. We have signal lights to help us navigate safely and make sure that people know when it's time to go, when it's time to stop. And when people ignore those lights, bad things happen. We are the light. We're supposed to help people navigate through life. We're supposed to show them which way to go. Hey, if you follow me, I'll be the light. Follow me and you'll get there safely. Unfortunately, some people don't obey the lights and they end up having head-on collisions. But without the light, everyone would have head-on collisions. Light dispels darkness. When a light is turned on, darkness is eliminated. Light is always stronger than darkness. Darkness cannot put out a light. But when the light's not on, darkness takes over. Light and darkness cannot coexist. Darkness is simply the absence of light. The brighter a light, the less darkness there is. So why is the world getting dark? Is it because darkness is becoming bigger? Or is it because the light is not shining as brightly as it should? We like to complain about how dark the world is becoming. The world's just getting darker and darker. If we would shine our light, be the light in the dark place, the darkness would disappear. In our modern society, we have lights everywhere. Most of us have multiple lights in every room of our house, and we can control how much or how little light we want. We can easily turn a switch on or off, or turn a little dial to dim it and give some mood lighting. You know, back in Jesus' day, they didn't have mood lighting. They had light. And if they had light, they used the light. Most of them complained they didn't have enough light. A lot of houses would only have one light for the whole household. And when it got dark, they'd take that one light, and he talks about putting it up on a stand or putting it up on a table. They'd bring that one light out, and they'd put it up in the highest part of the room so it could cast the light a little bit further. And the whole family would gather around that one light and do everything around that one light. And if somebody had to go to relieve themselves, they either had to go in the dark, or they had to tell the rest of the family, sit still for a minute, I need to take the light with me. They wanted more light. They didn't say, let's turn the light down, let's have a little bit of mood lighting. They said, where can we get more light? How can we make that light brighter? Light was important to them. Light was valued. We need to remember where our source of light comes from. We don't produce light on our own. Our light comes from Jesus, who was the original light. The best way to explain this is a word called, I've got it here somewhere, photoluminance. Anybody know what that word means? I needed Brianna here this morning to explain it. Photoluminance. That's when something absorbs the light from something else and then gives it back. Now, we have like glow sticks, which is like a chemical reaction. You snap it and you shake it, the two chemicals mix and make light. Okay, that's one way of doing it. But when you do that, that light can only be used one time. It eventually fades out and then it is no more. Photoluminance is when you take something out, put it in the light, it absorbs that light, and then you take it out and it glows for a while, it still loses light, but then you can take it back, recharge it by putting it under the light again, and then it produces more light. And I went out shopping yesterday, went to several stores trying to find an object that does that, and I couldn't find any. They used to be really, I remember Frisbees that glow in the dark. You remember those? It'd be cool. Go out in the park after dark, and you can see the Frisbee until the light finally wears out of it. You put it under the light, and then you take it out in the darkness, you can see it. And I was going to hold one up in here to let you see if you could see the glow from the object. Because with the lights on, you don't notice it. It just looks like a normal object, except it's kind of a weird greenish color. Okay? You can't see the light coming from that object when it has full brightness. If you go out in the sunshine in the daytime, you can't see the light. It's soaking up the light at that time, but you can't see it until you take it into a dark place. And I told Taylor, I said, I wish we had a way of making this room dark. There's no way we can make it completely dark with those windows there, because it would be great to take that object and show you. You don't see it until the lights go out. But when the lights go out, now you see that object. And if it was the only light in this room, if we could make this room completely dark and we had just that one glow in the dark object, everybody would be looking at that one object because there's nothing else to see. And that's the way it is with us as believers. Jesus is the light. We come here on Sunday to soak up that light, to spend time with other people, to soak up His presence, and His light comes and fills us. But then we're not supposed to just keep soaking and soaking and soaking and soaking and soaking. We're supposed to take that out into a dark world. And when we take it out of the world, people see His light through us. Because we've spent time in His presence, we take it out to a dark world. It does no difference, makes no difference here. We're all lights. But it's not making a difference. It needs to go out where the darkness is. Our light comes from Jesus. John 8:12 says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John 12:46, Jesus said, I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. But then He said, I am leaving, so I'm going to pass my light on to you. Jesus said if people followed Him, they wouldn't stumble in darkness. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. We need to give people something to follow. We need to be out where they can see us, see our lives, and say, I want to be like that. I don't know what it is about that person, but there's something there I like. I want to follow this person because I like what I'm seeing. And as they follow us, they're actually following the true light, Jesus Christ. Jesus filled us with photoluminance, the ability to soak up His light and share it with the world. John 12:36, Jesus said, believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. We are supposed to be children of light. We are supposed to reflect or shine His light because we are His children. We can't produce light on our own. But when we spend time with God, the light should fill us and then shine out of us so the world can see Him in us. Now notice that when our light shines, it doesn't bring glory to us. It brings glory to Him because He's the source of light. In 5:16, He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We shine our light so that people can see Jesus. You're the only Jesus some will ever see. Jesus is not going to come back again to show His light. He will come back again, but at that time it'll be too late. He's not coming as the light of the world at that time. He came as that. But now He passed it on to us. And if we don't shine the light, people will never find Him. Jesus said we are salt and light. Salt and light, neither one do any good unless they're being used. Salt in a shaker can be seen, but while being seen, it isn't accomplishing anything. Light is intended to be seen, but light can only be seen when it's surrounded by darkness. And that's why today is the perfect time for us to get out in the world. Because the darker the world, the brighter the light. It's not really brighter, it just appears brighter because the darkness is all around. Instead of getting discouraged when we see what's happening around us, we just say, you know what, this is the time for me to shine. If I go out now and shine, people are going to see it because people are looking for something. You know, when there's a little bit of light, people might be out there just, you know, they can see enough to kind of find their way around. But if you're the only light, everybody's going to look to you because you're the only thing to look at. Light is to be seen. Light surrounded by other lights doesn't do a whole lot of good. Jesus said we are here to influence the world. That's what he's talking about in this passage. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. We are here to be influencers. We are here to make a difference. We should be making the world a better place. So a couple questions to ask yourselves this morning. Is the world a better place because you're here? Is the world a better place because this church is here? Here's a question. If this church ceased to exist tomorrow, would our community miss it? I know you sitting here would miss it. I don't have a place to go on Sunday. What am I going to do? I got to figure out where else to go. We would miss it. I would miss it. But would our community miss it? Do they even know we're here? We are here to make a difference. We don't make a difference here. We make a difference out there. Salt and light are valuable if they're doing their job. But if salt is not being salty, and if light is not shining in the darkness, they're worthless. That's what Jesus said. If you're not doing your job, then why are you even here? And some of you may be saying, I wish I wasn't. I wish I could just go to heaven to be with Christ. Yeah, we all look forward to that day. But he has a job for us to do while we're here. That's why he left us here. He needs us here to do what he would be doing if he was here. Our job is to bring as many people with us as we can. And we don't do that sitting in a pew on Sunday morning. Now, we're not going to cancel Sunday services. We need this because this is where we come get the light to take it out. But what are we doing with the rest of our week? Are we just biding our time waiting for Sunday to come around again? Or are we out being light, being salt at Safeway, at the mall, on our job, in our school, in our neighborhood? We need to get out of here and out into the world where we can make a difference. We are the salt. We are the light. Yes, Jesus really said that. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just passing on what Jesus said. Jesus said, you are salt and light, and if you're not doing your job, you're worth nothing. How many would rather be worth something doing your job? Jesus said, be the salt, be the light. Heavenly Father, we are thankful that you came to be the light of the world. You came into a dark world to show the way. And because of that, and because somebody was light to us, because somebody didn't hide away, but they came to us, we saw that light in them, and we are now followers of you. But Father, don't let us hide that light. That's old song we sing, hide it under a bushel, no. Help us to let our light shine brightly, because there is a world that needs to see you. And they won't see you unless they see you in us. We need to soak up your light and then take that light to a world that desperately needs you. Help us to leave this place and this week shine in the darkness. Shine your light, shine your love to a world that needs you. We love you, Jesus. Amen.